he'll essentially make basketball synonymous with football at BYU. That would be the crowning achievement. Kevin Young, he's escalated it to a level that I'm telling you, there are Cougar fans out there like, oh, football's fun and all, but I'm all in on this basketball team. And if he can keep that going, that's where he'll match Lavell.
Hello and welcome to the Aptive Podcast Studio. This is the Loyal Cougars Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, alongside Locked On Cougars host, Jake Hatch. Welcome back, Jake.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
We're going to start calling this the Loyal Cougars, Locked On Cougars collab with how often you join the show and how often I mistakenly call the Loyal Cougars Podcast the Locked On Cougars Podcast.
Hey, it's always a pleasure to come down and join you. I always enjoy talking about the Cougars, and obviously expands the audience to both sides of it, if that makes sense.
Yep. All Cougar fans tend to watch all Cougar podcasts. So we
Yes.
welcome your audience as well as our audience, and hopefully you get some of our audience as well.
The crossover audience is very large. Like, here's the thing about what Cougar fans doing as long as I have in sports media is that BYU fans, they are like loyal to a fault, and they consume everything when it comes to BYU.
Absolutely. And honestly, that's why BYU Twitter or X and Cougar Board is such like a big site, because it's got such a massive following of BYU fans who love to consume BYU content.
No doubt.
And I've said this before, like it goes back to, in market, even when you've got, local beat writers writing about BYU versus any other team in the market, maybe even including the Jazz. It probably depends on if the Jazz are having a good season or not. But BYU brings in the most listeners, readers, and viewership out of any other team in the state.
Oh, yeah.
Other than maybe the Jazz.
Good, bad, or indifferent, the Cougars are a force.
Yes.
Because here's the deal. There's a lot of fans obviously here along the Wasatch Front. That's where the most concentration of BYU fans are. But this is a fan base that goes nationwide and international. I can tell you from Locked On Cougars side of things, I have listeners in New Zealand. I have a guy who lives on a sailboat in the Philippines. He pings off of different cell towers in the Philippines and downloads shows and then listens to them when he gets a chance to download them.
Yeah.
They're all over the place. And the thing is, they always check back to here.
Yeah, and BYU has kind of the built-in benefit of having, a church-sponsored university with church members, and I think Tosh mentioned this a couple episodes ago, but it was Brian Logan. It was when I had Brian Logan on a few weeks ago, and he mentioned, and this is a fact, that like even if you're not a BYU fan as your primary team, if you're a member of the church, like you and you're a sports fan, BYU is somewhat on your list.
You have an affiliation.
Even some Utah fans, right? Even like they say, oh, I cheer for Utah, but BYU, I'm a member of the church, and so BYU is kind of my second team. Yeah, which I'm not built like that. I don't know how you can be a fan of both, but
I've got it's an extended family member. So it's family member in my family, but the extended family of that person, they're ASU fans, but their second team, the Cougars.
Yeah,
but I've seen it with Texas. You may have a team, but to your point, I think it'd be kind of hard to have two teams to root for, but some people can pull it off.
In-state rivalries is tough to be a fan of both teams.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Especially if it's Utah BYU or Utah State BYU, that's not really going to happen.
And I'll actually say a large part of why, granted, again, they have this built-in fan base with the church. A lot of it too is that BYU does a really good job of getting their story out there. I think John McBride, I think Tyson Hutchins, who we've had on the show, they do a phenomenal job of getting their product out to the fan base.
Correct.
To ignite the fan base, to grow the fan base, to get engagement from the fan base. They do a phenomenal job. That was separate from what we were going to be talking about in this show.
It's very true, though.
But it kind of leads into it, too, because I actually think, in the news of the week last week, there was actually quite a bit. But the big news, I thought, was that Kevin Young was extended.
Yeah.
His contract was extended after 1 year at BYU. And what I loved about this is, and I don't know if a lot of people necessarily thought twice about this, but the fact that it was leaked or it was reported by Shams Charania. And this isn't the first time Shams has reported something about BYU and about Kevin Young specifically.
Well, and the thing is, so Woj broke the news of KY getting hired at BYU. Shams is now breaking the news of the extension. But to your point, there's a reason why they're having these premier insiders break this news, because it shows that BYU's nationally relevant, and somebody like Shams, who he reports on the NBA. College basketball is not his purview, but he understands that Kevin Young is a big deal in NBA circles, and if he can break news about that, it makes inroads both in college hoops and in the NBA.
Yeah, and I think there's two parts to this. I think this is a calculated effort by BYU, knowing that if they put out a release saying that Kevin Young was extended, it's going to reach BYU fans and maybe some Big 12 football fans or basketball fans, not football fans, basketball fans, and maybe some other NCAA basketball fans.
The field of 68 guys would run with it.
Sure, yeah. So it's going to reach that audience.
Yes, yeah.
When you have a guy who's followed by every fan of the NBA, he's a representative of ESPN, right?
Maybe the highest paid ESPN individual employee.
He's the new Woj.
Yeah.
Right. So you allow him to leak or report on this. Now, granted, some of the local guys are probably going to be a little bit upset by that, as you would imagine. But this is calculated, right? They're giving this information to a national guy with the anticipation that he's going to share this with his following, which is much larger than. And maybe not necessarily larger than BYU's, but it's a different audience. They're sharing this to an audience that doesn't typically hear about or read about BYU, and it just extends their reach.
Correct. As I say, the reach is why you do it. It is to get to fan bases both in the NBA and the college hoop circles that otherwise wouldn't pay one iota of attention. You're getting Fordham fans. You're getting Long Beach State. They're all like, oh, BYU's coach is getting an extension for 1 year. And that, in turn, leads them to say, why is he getting that extension? And that's when the interest level gets turned up.
And honestly, you're getting, it's not even college basketball fans. Yeah. It's it's NBA. Grizzlies fans, it's Suns fans, right? Who were thinking maybe they might sign Kevin Young.
We can get to that.
So, and we will. But again, you're just extending your reach, and I love this. Yeah. So let's get to the actual meat of the matter, which is Kevin Young extending. The question becomes then, was the extension a result of anything in particular, or was it just the fact that he had a phenomenal Sweet 16 season in his first year at BYU with a top 10, top 5 recruiting class, signing the number 1 recruit in the country? I imagine that has to do with the fact that BYU wanted to extend him, but the timing of it, with his name kind of circling around Phoenix. I know Phoenix, as everyone knows, Phoenix was looking for their new head coach. Is that coincidental?
Now, so I'm going to take you back to the day that Brian Santiago was introduced as BYU AD. We did
mention this, yes.
So he got up there and he said, I want to lock all of our coaches. I want them to be locked in. And then by name, he goes, Kevin Young. He's priority number 1, essentially. I was told by multiple people who I trust that was not circumstantial. That was a calculated thing that he put on the record to put it out there. Because at that point, the Phoenix Suns were making overtures to Kevin Young. And they continued to do so. And it forced Brian Santiago, like the first 2 days he's on the job, hey, by the way, Brian, what's it going to take to keep you here in Provo? Because Phoenix, Matt Ishbia, if there's one thing Matt Ishbia is notorious for, it's spending money like it's water. He's paying 2 coaches, Frank Vogel and Mike Budenholzer right now, both buyouts that number in the tens of millions of dollars. And oh, by the way, he just hired, is it Jaden? What's his name? Ott, Kevin, I don't remember the kid's name. His last name's Ott, as a new head coach. He's probably going to be paying him at least $6, $7, $8 million annually as well. Kevin Young was being courted by the Phoenix Suns. Well, BYU, to their credit, Kevin went to them, I'm sure, with his agent and said, hey, I don't necessarily want to leave. And we all know that when mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. Yeah. And his wife wants to be here. She wants more stable footing for the family and everything. And Kevin essentially said to BYU, I'm sure, make it worth my while. And to BYU's credit, they did.
Yeah. By the way, congratulations to the Youngs. I think they're expecting their 4th, right?
And he revealed that just the other day.
Yeah. So 2 big things for him this last week. Good for him.
New contract, and I'm having another kid.
By the way, Jordan Ott was
Jordan. Okay. I wanted to say Jaden, but I know that's the running back from Cal that's going to Oklahoma.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this goes back to a post that I saw on Cougar Board from Boring. His name's Boring on Cougar Board. It says this confirms to me that Phoenix targeted him.
They did. I'll confirm that right now for you, Boring. Yeah. They did target him.
And I don't think this necessarily should sway that opinion one way or the other. I think the fact is, they targeted him at least to some extent. They wanted him, right? There's no reason why they wouldn't.
Let's put it this way. If he was still with the Suns, had he not taken the job at BYU,
it's his job to lose, right?
He's the head coach in Phoenix right now.
Absolutely. So then, we look at Kevin Young and we're like, this guy's a legend, right? It's crazy to think that a year ago, we knew very little about this guy. We knew that he was one of the top assistants in the NBA. We had a lot of hope for him. We knew what his goal was, his mission was at BYU, which was to turn BYU into the most NBA-like school in college basketball.
NBA factor, I think, is the term you used.
So fast forward to today. We're only a year into this, but there's this comparison, at least in my mind, of does Kevin Young does he have the ability to reach Lavell Edwards status? And I know people are listening and they're like, hold your horses.
Jake, what are you saying?
He's only been here for a year. Like, chill out, right? Like, I get it. I totally understand that. And so I'm not going to say, is he there yet? Because of course he's not. But you look at Lavell's trajectory, and Lavell actually struggled his first few years. And obviously turned it on and found a way to be the most successful college football coach at BYU, and arguably one of the most successful college football coaches in all of college football. So that said, what does Kevin Young have to do to get to that point? And is he already accomplishing some of that?
He's already accomplishing some of it because, as we saw, what Lavell ended up doing at BYU was turning BYU into a destination. And PK often mentions this, that Lavell, when we had him on radio after he had retired, he did those Football Fridays with Mac and Hans and Scotty. And Lavell said one of his most proud things about his time at BYU wasn't the national championship, wasn't the quarterback assembly line that he assembled. He said, we made football matter in Provo, Utah. Because for 50 plus years before it was an afterthought. Let's be real. It was a basketball school. They'd won the NIT titles under Stan Watts. The one thing that Kevin Young is going to have to accomplish, probably has to win a national title. That's one thing you have to match Lavell with. There needs to be some longevity, but in this day and age of college sports, longevity is measured in, is he here for 10 years versus nearly 30 for Lavell. And I know if you extend Lavell's assistant coaching record, it's 40 plus years at BYU. But I think that Kevin Young has the potential to do just that. And he'll essentially make basketball synonymous with football at BYU. That would be the crowning achievement. I'm not saying that Steve Cleveland didn't do it. I'm not saying that Mark Pope didn't do it. Dave Rose. They all had their moments of making BYU basketball relevant. But Kevin Young, he's escalated it to a level that I'm telling you, there are Cougar fans out there like, oh, football's fun and all, but I'm all in on this basketball team. Yeah. And if he can keep that going, that's where he'll match Lavell.
Yeah, I think Steve Cleveland, Dave Rose, they made it an expectation to make the tournament.
Absolutely.
Every year. Winning record, make the tournament. 20 wins. That was kind of the expectations. Kevin Young and Mark Pope to an extent too. I think the expectation with him was that we want to start seeing, first round wins. We want to start seeing, conference tournament wins.
Well, and then when they upgraded to the Power 4 level, now the Power 5 in basketball, it changed the equation a little bit. Like, hey, how competitive can you be in what many considered to be the best basketball conference in the country? And that's the one thing I think Mark Pope had to shoulder, and I think in many respects may have told him maybe I'm reaching a ceiling that I don't want to kind of cap out at, and that's why he jumped to Kentucky, where he feels like he can have a bigger opportunity. And that's his alma mater. I get all that. But now Kevin Young has come in. He's embraced everything that BYU requires. He says, okay, honor code, great. Academic restrictions, great. Give them all to me. My whole goal is I'm going to bring the best talent I can here. As you mentioned, I'm going to make the most NBA-like college program, and we're going to have success along the way. And he got hired in April. We're in June, so we're just a year and 2 months into his tenure, and he's completely changed the game for BYU basketball. That screams to me what you're talking about. The trajectory, it's there for him to be Lavell-like.
Yeah, so let me go to my kind of four pillars of why Lavell was so legendary at BYU and why he accomplished and is revered and remembered the way he is. Success, as you mentioned, is one, and we all know about his success. But it's not just success; it's how he achieved the success. He was revolutionary as a head coach, right? He introduced, at least from a volume perspective, the passing game to college football, and we all know about the quarterback factory. His longevity, which you mentioned, decades. Yeah. And does that mean that Kevin Young has to be here for decades? Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, but I'm telling you, in this day and age of college sports, the coach that like a Lavell that's there for 30 or 40 years, I just don't see it existing as much as it did once upon a time.
It's not common. You got Mark Few, you've got Calipari, but even Calipari,
he's jumped.
And then so longevity. We'll just say longevity. You can put a number to that, whatever number you want to that. The last thing I put is coaching tree.
Oh,
so the success of your coaching tree. Can you have a staff of assistants who can go out and can kind of, obviously I don't think it necessarily means anything for BYU if somebody from his staff went to another team. I actually think that would hurt if like Burgess left or whoever left, and
sure,
we have to fill that hole.
Yeah,
but it indicates success of your head coach if you have a staff that can go on and can kind of emulate what you've done at this school or at whatever school you're at, and you can go and do the same thing at another school. I think it indicates the success of that head coach. So. Is Kevin Young successful? Yes.
Absolutely.
He's so far been very successful.
Sweet 16 in year one. We've been to Sweet 16s in 45 years, everybody.
And we might go to 2 in a row and hopefully even
further. Yes, absolutely.
You know, I think some analysts have us, some experts have us in the Final Four. And that's not a stretch to say, right? Like it's wild to think that like, you know, every team's like, yeah, we won a national championship. We hope to win a conference tournament. You know, everyone kind of says that because that's just locker room talk or whatever, but like it's a real expectation, which is wild considering where we were last April.
Correct.
So we know that he's having success. Is it revolutionary? I would argue yes.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that's revolutionary is he's brought in NBA personnel down to this level, and BYU has given them the funding to do that. They've got NBA level nutritionists. They've got an NBA trainer. What his name? He worked with the Bucks for years. He's an LDS guy. He's got all these NBA-esque things that he brought down to the college level. Now, you have to pare it down a little bit because the NBA has these expansive staffs. He's got a pretty expansive staff for the college realm, but everything about it is geared towards the pro game. It's a pro model of how they go about playing basketball. It's pro in terms of their ability to break film down. The one thing I think Kevin gets bored with is having just 2 games a week.
Yeah.
Like he is used to game, sit down on the plane, flying wherever you're going, breaking it down. The next day you're in practice and you play a game again.
Double headers.
He's all about that part of it, but I think he's adapted himself to say, okay, we got 2 games a week, gives me extra time to break it down. And his game plans, they're comprehensive.
Yeah. Now, when I say revolutionary, and I agree with you, that is what's revolutionary. Is he's turning BYU into an NBA light, into almost a G League, right? Yeah. And that's revolutionary because, and you can say like, oh, Coach Krzyzewski at Duke, like he developed his players for the NBA. To me, that's different. To me, it's Krzyzewski got his players prepared for the NBA. In other words, you know, he made them, he developed them.
Yeah, physically developed
player
them,
development. He developed them to be ready for the NBA. What Coach Young is doing, nobody else has done, which is he's turning BYU into what players would expect the NBA experience to be like, and that's actually where kind of I think the honor code really fits into this scenario. I'm not saying NBA teams have honor codes, but there's an expectation that if you are a paid athlete at a professional team in a professional league, there's a higher expectation, a higher standard to abide by your team rules, by the NBA bylaws, like there, and you know, obviously the national laws as well, like the federal laws as well, like that. But there's a higher expectation, right? Because the spotlight's more on you and you are paid, right? You can get fired.
Oh, and that's the thing about it is teams look at you as an asset. Like that's what they look at you. I know that sounds kind of crass to say that, but that's how teams view these athletes. They're investing millions upon millions of dollars into these athletes and also paying them millions of dollars. Well, with all that investment and all that money that's going to you, you're expected to function at a pro level. And that goes for the NBA, that goes for the NFL. It doesn't matter what professional sport you're in. You're expected to handle yourself accordingly. Yes, are there guys going out to the club at night? Sure. But by and large, a lot of these guys aren't doing that. Yeah. They understand that they have to take care of themselves if they want to make this gravy train not end.
And going to the club, like James Harden, right? He's renowned for going to the club. Michael Jordan was a gambler, right? We know these things.
Yes.
None of what they did was illegal, and none of what they did was against league policy or team policy or any of that. The point is that the honor code exists to keep players out of trouble.
Yeah.
That's not to say that these players can't ever go to a club or gamble or break the honor code outside of BYU. The point is that the honor code exists, at least, you know, in Kevin Young's perspective, as a representative of team policy, of league policy, of federal law. That if you don't abide by these rules that you agreed to, right, you're being held accountable to this standard that you agreed to. You're not going to stick in the NBA, right? You're going to break laws in the NBA. You're going to break team rules and league policy. And so, yes, is the honor code stricter than what they're going to experience in the NBA?
Absolutely.
Of course. But the point is, if you can abide by the honor code at BYU, or at least not get caught.
Sure.
Because I'm not gonna pretend that people do all the time. But if you can get through BYU and not have any issues with the honor code, then teams look at you and they're like, he's he goes by the book.
It shows that I use the term stick-to-itiveness. Like, I know it's not a term, but it shows that teams that you're serious about your craft.
Yes.
And that's what teams care about. They want you to give a what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So that's the third is this kind of revolutionary approach.
Yeah.
We talked about longevity. He's not there yet. Obviously, he's only been here a year. And then coaching tree success. Again, we don't know yet. And I do think that with the staff that he's brought in, I would be surprised if any of his assistants, if none of his assistants go out and either go back to the NBA and be one of the top assistants in the NBA, or maybe even a head coach in the NBA, or go find a different college team. Chris Burgess has kind of already bounced around. Like, I could see Chris Burgess being a head coach at.
I've got a pretty good authority that Burgess at some point would like to be a head coach in college basketball. Now, where that is, TBD.
Yeah.
But could he be the Tommy Lloyd of what Mark Few had at Gonzaga, where he goes out? We've seen Gonzaga have incredible success under Mark Few. Well, Dan Monson got it going. Mark Few has carried it forward, and now Tommy Lloyd's taken a lot of what he learned working under Few and has taken it to Arizona.
Yeah.
Could that be what not Mark Few? Yeah, that could be what Kevin Young has in a Chris Burgess, for example.
Yeah. So that is yet to be determined.
Yeah.
But I think Kevin Young is well on his way to being at the same level as Lavell. By the way, there's other coaches at BYU too. Like, I was thinking Jen Rockwood. There's the Olmsteads.
The thing is, BYU is a destination school for a lot of people, and I know that Jennifer Rockwood, she probably has had opportunities to leave. We know that Lavell Edwards famously turned down the Detroit Lions. When you have success, the level BYU has success at, people want your people. Ed Eyestone, Diljit Taylor. You don't tell me that they have not had other cross-country or track programs say, hey, is there any chance you'd be interested? And they've said that, no, BYU is where I want to be. And that is something that BYU is lucky to have. The Olmsteads you mentioned, both Sean and Heather, they've had some really incredible coaches that probably could be making a lot more money and having a bigger profile at other programs, but they buy into what BYU has for them, and they have a lot of success along the way.
And I would argue that if if volleyball or soccer was a higher profile sport, if either of them were higher profile, they would be as renowned.
Absolutely,
as
I agree.
Lavell.
Well, Diljit Taylor to me is a fantastic story. She's not a member of the faith. She came here as an assistant coach, and she's been so good at her job that she is a non-member head coach of a sport at BYU. And also, Nike just hired her to go around the world and talk about what she does coaching.
Yeah.
You don't think that's expanding the brand of BYU? Was she in Mumbai, I think, not too long ago, did a big thing for Nike. It shows that BYU's got pull, and it goes literally international.
Yeah. So hopefully we can keep Kevin around. And I think this extension, you don't know numbers, right? I don't think numbers have been released.
Here's the thing. Give the Phil to 68 or somebody a couple of weeks, and those numbers will filter out. Because the initial report was, Matt Norlander, I think, had it was 7 years, $30 million on the deal. Now, does that mean that the extension adds 2 or 3 years onto it? That seems pretty logical, and that probably makes the pact probably a decade total in length. And when it comes to the NBA, I would imagine that if Phoenix was going to pay Mike Budenholzer $10 million, which is they signed him a 4-year, $40 million deal, they paid out 1 year, and then the buyout is $30 million, but that's another story for another day. You would think, okay, Kevin probably told BYU, hey, for example, if I were to get a Budenholzer deal, that's 4 years for $40 million. Can you make that up to me? Maybe you don't pay out $10 million annually, but over the length of this deal, am I making that same amount? And that, I think, may have been the equalizer in all this.
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptiv will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptiv is why. Visit AptivPestControl.com/LoyalCougars or call 844-966-4787. Mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's AptivPestControl.com/LoyalCougars or call 844-966-4787. Terms and conditions apply. Get home field advantage with Aptiv. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. Let's move on. We've got some other big news this week, last week, which was the NCAA House settlement finally coming out, or
the news dump on Friday night at like 8:00.
Resolving, the best time to release news. So for those that don't know, and I still kind of there's a lot to kind of unravel in all of this, but at the end of the day, what they've settled on is that schools can give revenue share up to $20.5 million. As a school. That's about 75% of that goes to football. So, and this is a report from Pete
Thamel?
No. On 3 Sports. I got to find the report.
Pete Nakos?
Nakos.
Okay.
Pete Nakos.
Yeah.
He says Power 4 football programs will have roughly $13 to $16 million to spend on rosters for the 2025 season. Many schools have front-loaded contracts ahead of settlement approval, taking advantage of contracts not being vetted by the newly formed NIL clearinghouse, which we'll talk about in just a second. But roughly $13 to $16 million revenue share to spend on rosters for this next season. So this is going to take place, I think, July 1st is when
July 1 is when it fully goes into effect. And BYU, for example, I know for months they have been talking with these players, and either they have or will be signing contracts with BYU football that will say, insert player name here, plays this position, and you are being paid out under this revenue share this amount of money. And the way BYU's approached it, as well as the vast majority of these Power 4 programs, is they look at it essentially as an NFL salary cap, where, guess what? The priority positions, quarterbacks, offensive tackles, wide receivers, defensive ends, defensive tackles, those are going to make the most amount of money. It's a scaled down version because you mentioned if it's $16 million, NFL salary caps are $200+ million.
Yeah.
But you can kind of adjust the figure in your mind for that. And it's going to be interesting to see how this goes because, that it's a significant amount of money that's going in, extra money, I should say, going into the pockets of these athletes because NIL's not going anywhere. Scholarships aren't going anywhere. Alston case money's not going anywhere. Cost of living stipends aren't going anywhere. It's just another revenue stream for athletes.
Yeah. So the real winner in all of this is the athletes,
absolutely,
which is great.
Yeah.
The question then becomes, what is this clearinghouse, this supposed clearinghouse? And what
NIL Go.
NIL Go. Yep.
So Deloitte Consulting, which is one of the big 3 consulting firms. Don't ask how I know that because I have 2 roommates in college that ended up working for these consulting firms. That's how I know it's one of the big 3.
Nice.
But it is going to essentially vet all these deals. Now, $600 or under will not need to be vetted. You can just do a deal, no problem, no questions asked, you move along. Anything over $600 has to go through this clearinghouse, and Deloitte will vet it, and they're saying they're going to track market value. Jake, the question is, how in the heck do they know what market value is?
Yeah.
So
per athlete.
Per athlete.
Every school, every athlete that gets NIL money, and most are going to get over $600.
Absolutely.
How do they do that?
Well, therein lies the problem here. Because it is my personal opinion on the matter that the second that any athlete out there who feels like a deal that they had in place gets nixed by this clearinghouse, NIL Go is going to be sued into oblivion. Mm-hmm. And guess what? We're going to end up right where we have been, where there's an unregulated market. This is supposed to calm the waters a little bit and regulate it a little bit. It'll regulate it so long as it doesn't get sued into oblivion.
Yeah, and that's assuming that NIL Go does reject anything over $600 for any athlete.
Okay, can I pose a question to you about that?
Yeah.
So I had this posed to me actually. Said, so Jake, here's the question. If you have 7 or 8 programs who agree that a market value for an athlete is, let's say, $8 million, how is Deloitte going to shut that down?
Yeah. Who's determining? They have to be the ones to determine market value, right?
We
just don't know. There's so many question marks still, right?
That's the question. Are they going to have the full authority to say, nope, that's not market value, therefore it is denied?
Yeah.
There's a big question there.
So it says, in a gathering at the ACC spring meetings last week, Deloitte officials reportedly shared that 70% of past deals from NIL collectives would have been denied, while 90% of past deals from public companies would have been approved. So collectives, right? So you're looking at Royal Blue Collective and what's
Coup Connect.
Coup Connect.
Yes.
70%, and I don't know if that's looking at all of college
Sure.
sports. So NIL collectives would have been denied 70% of the time, or sorry, it would have been
From the collectives would have been denied.
From 90% from public companies.
So the one thing I know about this is BYU is fully intent on NIL continuing. That I know that. The biggest thing is now companies will have to sign these individual deals with these athletes, and insert Silicon Slopes company's name out there. They're going to sign a marketing affiliation agreement with these athletes. Qualtrics.
Let's just go around the NIL.
Sure, yeah, but
collectives.
they're just going to sign a deal with this athlete and saying, okay, you're going to market our wares, whatever those might be, whether you're espousing what Qualtrics does in their experience management software or the like, and we're going to pay you X amount of dollars. There you go. Guess what? If they're saying that 90% of those are going to be approved, BYU boosters, who are these high-powered executives and CEOs and presidents of these companies, are like, sweet, doing the exact same thing we were doing already.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a different form.
Yeah. And I don't know if it really affects much in terms of BYU's leverage in being able to get athletes. I still think they're going to be able to afford and pay for like an AJ DeBonta. This is more like kind of your second tier, third tier athletes where if this clearinghouse NIL Go determines that these kind of lower tier athletes aren't eligible for whatever BYU or whatever school is trying to pay them, then they deny those and then you have issues. But I think in terms of like getting the top notch guys, there's still going to be a bidding war. There's still going to be a ton of money sent their way. And this settlement doesn't really determine whether or not this school can pay more or less for this athlete. It just determines where it comes from.
Well, and that's the other thing about this is the $20.5 million figure, it's a cap.
Yeah.
You're not required to pay that full allotment, and very few outside of the Power Four will be able to afford that, quite frankly. Now, we had Brian Santiago tell Mitch Harper that BYU is going to be competitive. That's the term he used about year one on this. That cap is actually going to go up year by year over the next 10 years. How much, that's TBD, but you're not expected to pay the full allotment. But if you want to be, to your point, Jake, considered to be in the mix for the biggest names, you're paying the full allotment.
You have to.
Because guess what? You'll be perceived as being a lesser than if you don't.
Yeah, and so then the question is BYU ready for this? And there was an interesting post actually on Cougar Board by Hammurabi.
Okay.
This is a guy, I actually don't know a lot about him personally. I don't know anything about him personally, but he says he's going to a National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics convention.
NACDA, which started today, actually.
So he's there.
So Monday we're recording this.
And he's representing I don't know if it's a consulting firm or an actual product or service.
Okay.
But he says, we've been incubating a new revenue share approach to athletic departments in the P4. We'll be launching with BYU shortly and then hopefully among the Big 12 after that, but have meetings with the SEC and Big 12 college leadership as well.
Okay.
He says, I don't know what I can share, and I'm actually going to try and get him on the show to see if he can talk a little bit more about it. But he says, don't know what he can share due to policies. But what he did share is he said BYU is in terrific shape. When it comes to this kind of new revenue share approach.
Yeah.
He said they did an effectiveness index that they may publish at some point. It shows spend per student athlete and spend per director's cut point, which BYU is way ahead of other schools. He says it's still rough and we will refine it, but we have a lot to be proud of at BYU. What it really tells is that each dollar BYU does bring in and spends on athletes and coaches governed by its principles goes much further than other schools bloated by admin and project burdens. Super proud of how our leadership stays true to mission and good management principles. So it sounds like, based on this effectiveness index that this anonymous poster on Cougar Board wrote about, by the way, I believe it, is that BYU's in really good shape. They've prepared for something like this, which gives me confidence, I think, in this approach going forward, where there's other schools, I think, that, their operating costs are incredibly bloated.
Yeah.
Even potentially like a Texas or
you want to know what Alabama,
Utah?
You know what Alabama's dealing with right now?
What?
They have a $36 million deficit. Yeah. Alabama.
Yeah.
They generated, I think it was, the number I saw, I think it was around $230 million in revenue. Their expenses are $260 million. If Alabama, who's the big bad you-know-what of the SEC, is running it in the red, as I understand it, 90% plus of college athletic departments operate at a deficit. They operate in the red. They're in debt. BYU doesn't operate that way. And the thing about it, Jake, is BYU made $19 million, for example, from their media rights deal this past year from the Big 12. They're going to be the full share member this coming year, which the projection is $31+ million. That's an extra $12 million that BYU is going to be able to build into that budget. I will say it right now on the record, the BYU will absorb this $20.5 million hit better than almost anybody across college athletics. We're talking about Utah. We're talking about every other school in the Big 12 having to cut budgets, whether it's personnel, travel. They're trying to scrounge up $20.5 million. And oh, by the way, the capital projects a lot of these schools took on, the debt payments to pay for the facilities that they built in the 20-teens, good luck, everybody. Yeah. Cal is the poster child for that. They have never paid a single dime, as I understand it, for the principal of the renovation of their football stadium. They're still paying just simply the interest amounts on this. And it numbers in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. They're like the extreme example of the worst, but I'm telling you, there's a bunch out there that they're leveraged hard, and this adds another $20.5 million to a budget that's already stretched thin. Good luck absorbing that. BYU will be able to absorb it because they practice what they preach, and that is living within their means.
So moral of the story is BYU's leadership should be running our country.
Well, yeah, to be frank, yes, they should.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's safe to say that BYU is in good shape. Sticking with football, we've got just a little bit more time. I want to talk about this report that came out of all places, Lubbock Online. So
the Lubbock Avalanche Journal.
Yes. Yeah. So a newspaper or a website out of Lubbock, Texas.
I think they're like the biggest newspaper in Lubbock, if I'm not mistaken.
So they wrote an article about this, specifically about the holding call against Utah that allowed BYU to drive down the field. We're talking about this game back in November, right? And this article comes out. So what happened was Utah appealed. And it's either public record or they just achieved.
So they FOIA'd it. Freedom of Information Act. Yeah. Now it came out of the story originally came out of another story that they built. They requested everything that had been submitted to Big 12 Director of Officials. I forget what his name was. I don't know if we have it on the rundown here, but I think it was Burks. Yeah. And so they FOIA'd all that, and as a result of what they were looking for in this Freedom of Information Request Act, they got the breakdown of the BYU-Utah game, which had 6 calls that were in question that were sent in by Utah officials asking for clarification on 6 different calls in the game, one of which was maybe the most consequential of the entire game, the famed holding call late that helped BYU get that victory.
Yeah, by the way, this is common practice, right? So I think in the article that it mentioned that there were, in fact, it's coaches from Texas Tech and Colorado sent in 13 plays for review. So it's just a standard practice after
Here's
the
the thing. BYU does this. Every program
Everyone does this. Yeah.
Because you want clarification because your coach is alone. They want to know, okay, this call was called this way. Yeah. Do I need to adapt my philosophy? This happens every week.
In every league, too, to be honest.
Absolutely.
The NBA does it, too.
Yeah.
But there were 13. This is just for reference. Yeah. There were 13 between Texas Tech and Colorado sent in to review. Mm-hmm. Burke said he disagreed with coaches on 8 and agreed on 5.
Okay.
So, you got roughly, a 60-40 split.
Yeah, it's roughly, yeah.
BYU, so Utah submitted 6, as you mentioned. All but 1 were disagreed with. So
correct.
5 were disagreed with. The only one that was agreed on was a discrepancy about the number.
I think it was like number 28 for number 30.
It's number 80, called 82, and it should have been 83.
There you go, yeah. So it was, one number off.
So he's like, yeah, I agree with that. Good job. But yeah, the one that was the biggest one in question, and this is what the Utah staffer had to write, would like clarity as to the penalty for defensive holding by number 5. The contact occurs, that's Vaughn, right?
Yeah, Zemaiah Vaughn.
Contact occurs near the line of scrimmage and does not impede the wide receiver's ability to progress vertically up the field. Burks disagreed, and he said QB looks to number 5 immediately after the snap. As receiver moves to go around the defender grabs the receiver and prevents him from running his route. Correct call. And it's just validating, right? Like we're 6-7 months past the event, and we finally get this kind of validation of yes, the call was correct. We don't have to look at slow-mo video anymore. Like, we have official
here's the thing.
evidence.
We got Zapruder film breakdown of this at points by both fan bases. We're talking, you slowed it down to like frame by frame.
Yeah.
Here's where it's like, you know what? This guy literally looks at film every single week and either, you mentioned, agrees or disagrees with these calls to let coaches know why exactly officials called it. And you mentioned validation. It is validation of BYU fans saying, see, it's the right call. Even if it's late in the game, I know that there's still going to be argument. You don't call that in that circumstance. You know what? A penalty is a penalty no matter when it occurs. And the official, he saw it, he threw the flag, and you know what? BYU benefited from it.
Well, and the funny thing too is of the other 5, you know, this is Utah was also saying like, oh, there was a hook from BYU's defender, or there was a blindside block that shouldn't have been called, or that should have been called that wasn't, and literally every single one of them were shot down except for the number. Yeah,
it was every single one that they tried to get the Big 12 officials to say, "See, we were no, you're disagree." And here's the thing: what Mark Harlan did, forever will flabbergast me. This only adds to the lore of that outburst. The fact that it was 100% right, and every other call that was in question about this was correct. It only adds to his decision that I still don't know why Sports Information at Utah did not stop him. Like, I cannot for the life of me understand why they did not say, Mark, you cannot do this. Now,
he's their boss.
If he threatens to like fire you and whatnot, okay.
You will let me do this.
But it only adds to the legend of what is already a legendary moment in rivalry history.
Yeah, and people can go back and they can say like, well, Burks he's human, he's wrong. Like that's fair. But the reality is, like, this guy had time to go back and watch it.
And we're months removed.
He is the head of officiating at the Big 12. So probably the biggest subject matter expert we have in the conference. And for him to side with the call, which was a holding call, which allowed BYU to march down the field and kick the field goal, which they still had to do, by the way. It's incredibly validating, and you know, it only adds fuel, I think, to the rivalry, which is great.
It does. I've already seen some of the discourse online, like, well, there was only this call this many times. I'm like, okay, now we're gonna break down when calls are being called. You know what? To your point, all it does is enhance what is already an elite rivalry.
Yeah. All right, Jake, thanks for hopping on the show.
Absolutely.
As always, it's a pleasure to have you. If you like what you heard from Jake, head over to his podcast. You probably already listen. As we mentioned, everyone seems to listen to every BYU podcast, and so we appreciate that. But head over to Locked On Cougars podcast. Give them a like and a follow. Also, if you like what you heard on this show, give our video or our podcast a like and follow as well as we keep this thing going. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Edmonds, alongside Jake Hatch. We'll see you next week.